4-year-old Dan was one of them. This happy, cheerful little boy was expecting a baby brother in a matter of weeks. His mother barely conscious as she sits with other grief-stricken parents and relatives who've come to register for assistance at the Government Relief Centre just metres away from the scene of the massacre. I can't imagine this kind of person exists, says his grandmother. I can't imagine a human could be this cruel to children. For this couple, clutching each other, their loss is unfathomable. Their 3.5-year-old fraternal twin boys, Wirarap and Warapon, their only children, were slaughtered. Here we see them in the car with their parents just days before their future was horrifically cut short. The father, now speechless, the mother still in shock. They were so talkative. They were at that age where they talked a lot, she explained. They had different characters. They were so lovely. For the emergency crews, the carnage they witnessed when they walked through the doors is a nightmare they won't ever be able to erase. The first thing I saw when I opened the door, I was stunned. I had to gather myself, he says. I have never seen anything like this before. We are learning gruesome details about what happened at this daycare centre from the first responders who were on the scene. They said that they found the bodies of the children and teachers spread across these 3 rooms, and we can still see the bloodstains splattered across the floor. They said all the bodies had knife wounds to the head. One of the children had tried to protect his face when the attacker wielded the knife, one responder says. He also found 2 children still alive. The first image I saw was children covered with blood, he remembers. I was trying to transport them to the hospital. Some of the kids still had a pulse, but I don't know if they made it. While children's pictures and animal masks decorate the walls, the innocence of this daycare centre has been lost forever. Bloodstains smeared throughout the classrooms, the furniture and abandoned school bags. A ghastly reminder of the horrors and evils unleashed in this refuge for the community's youngest and most treasured. Anna Korin, CNN, Nong Bua Lampur, Thailand.
24 weeks of unparalleled domination. India's indisputable number 1, CNN News 18, on your side.
Having borne the brunt of cross-border terrorism for decades, India firmly advocates a zero-tolerance approach. In our view, there is no justification for any act of terrorism regardless of motivation, and no rhetoric, however sanctimonious, can ever cover up bloodstains. Look at the whole 370 issue. What was a temporary provision of the Constitution was finally put to rest. This was supposed to be majoritarian. Now tell me, what was happening in Kashmir was not majoritarian?
I'm not to say I'm doing this because it is for counter-terrorism. When you are talking of an aircraft and capability of people, everybody knows where they are deployed and what is the use. You're not fooling anybody back.
Hello everyone, you're watching A Billion Ideas with me, Maria Shakil. This Saturday, India's foreign policy is going through a major shift, where the government is leveraging the power of a robust economy, a young and thriving democracy, international diaspora, and a rising diplomatic clout to reset the global agenda. India took advantage of the global COVID pandemic to reset the power dynamics as the leading economies of the world stumbled. Through vaccine Maitri and outreach with COVID supplies, India boosted its global position and set the stage to garner international faith in its manufacturing sector to challenge Chinese dominance. In the post-lockdown world, India is now resetting narratives surrounding both domestic and international issues, charting its own path through the India First Doctrine. From sending a message to Pakistan, which S Jaishankar did at the UNGA, flexing its diplomatic muscles with both the US and China, calling for a revamp of the United Nations, to challenging narratives surrounding Kashmir. India's efforts to position itself as an undisputed stakeholder in global affairs were on display during External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar's recently concluded 11-day visit to the United States. He made the case for a confident India that was ready for greater responsibility. Even when it comes to international matters, from the Russian invasion of Ukraine to international condemnation over the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China, India has championed a middle path, measuring its own strategic interests. Today, we decode the India First Doctrine, analyzing both the challenges and opportunities on the world stage. Joining me now is Professor Brahmachelani, Strategic Affairs expert, Ashok Sajanhar, former diplomat, Andrew K.P. Leung is international and independent China strategist based in Hong Kong, and Maximilian Hess is Central Asia Fellow in the Eurasia program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He's joining me from London. I'm going to begin with you, Ambassador Sajanhar. Increasingly, what is appearing is that India is speaking its mind clearly and is calling spade a spade, is no longer, holding on to anybody else's narrative. But even in US, for example, the External Affairs Minister went on to say that US should not be thinking that they are fooling the world when it comes to in the context of F-16.
No, you're very right, Maria. And, I would tend to agree with you that there is a greater confidence and boldness as far as India's position is concerned on various issues. India wants to set its own narrative rather than, be supporting some other country, someone else's narrative. And I think this is really borne out, you enunciated a number of reasons, a very strong and vibrant diaspora economy, strong economy. We've been able to handle the COVID pandemic well. We have been able to very nimbly skirt the challenges of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and so on and so forth. But I think in addition to that, we also need to recognize that, India's interests have increased greatly because, as India has grown, both politically, strategically, economically, and diplomatically, its interests have increased. So we need to protect, promote, and safeguard those interests, global interests. That is number one. And I think secondly, also, the world has been passing through this period of turmoil and turbulence. There is so much of confusion, so much of uncertainty. And if we have to safeguard our interests, we have to be nimble-footed. And that is why you find, whether it is Prime Minister Modi, who's, even in the virtual format, he was interacting with all the world leaders. He would go to all the major world, wherever confabulations take place, whether it is the Samarkand Summit or G20 or the other, or COP26. And Jaishankar, as you mentioned, he was in the United States. He was in New York for 7 days.
And right now he is in New Zealand. And I'm going to emphasize a little more on what he said in Washington. And Professor Brahmachelani, come in on this. I'm quoting S Jaishankar when he says, for someone to say, I'm doing this because it is all counter-terrorism content, and so when you are talking of an aircraft like a capability of an F-16 with that, where everybody knows, you know where they are deployed and their use. You are not fooling anybody by saying these things. And we have seen how Pakistan has used these jets. And we know what happened, particularly in the Balakot airstrike, where Pakistan launched F-16s to counter, but one was taken down by MiG-21. But the larger point here is the tone and tonality. Would you say that, all that what was seen in international context and diplomatic space of greater caution, that has been shed when you say that, we know who, you're not fooling anybody?
That is true. India is a rising power with an increasing international profile. But despite that, you're seeing President Joe Biden resuming U.S. coddling of Pakistan. The F-16 deal is one manifestation of this U.S. coddling of Pakistan.
Yes.
Biden has not said a word on China's...
There seems to be some problem with that line. Professor Brahmachalani, I'm going to fix that line. And I'll ask my producer to fix that line. And I'm going to come back to you. Okay. Andrew K.P. Leung, how is China and the world viewing India's assertion?
Well, I think that China is long begun to see that the world is become more multipolar. It's no longer dictated by a single hegemon. After the Second World War, for example, the United States-led so-called liberal order reigned supreme. But that is not just the liberal order. For example, under President Trump before, America was able to impose its will on almost all countries or most countries, regardless of the strategic interests of even allies. But now, I think that there is a gradual pushback by those countries who are able to defend their own strategic interests. Secondly, the world is no longer divided into blocks. The idea of blocks against one another no longer works because the whole world has become more interdependent. And so countries do not need to be permanent allies on all things. For example, India, of course, joined the United States in the so-called Quad against China. But it doesn't mean that India needs to go along with Americans' playbook on Russia, for example. So I think that the world is becoming more multipolar, more interconnected, and countries which are able to do so would be able to defend their own interests on single issues without sacrificing the areas for cooperation with other countries.
And is there a sense then, Mr. Hess, that because the situation has changed and it's in this multipolar world, every nation is trying to put its interest as paramount. And that's what is being communicated increasingly. And for India, it can be part of multiple blocks. But when it comes to being part of these blocks, it has always put its interest first. And that is a reality because of what happened in a post-pandemic world that we are living in. There is, and also in the backdrop of a live conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I think every country always puts its own interest first, or at least the interests of the government in power in less democratic countries. And India certainly is a rising power, but it has been very deft at managing a kind of unique place in international geopolitics for decades now, where it hasn't ever fully aligned with one side, even in the heights of the Cold War, although at various points it was more on Moscow's side. Today, I actually would disagree with some of the statements that we're becoming even more multipolar. And I think we certainly have lived in an increasingly multipolar era since the end of the Cold War, and particularly since the rise of China as a real geoeconomic superpower over the last 20 years. But now we're very quickly seeing a lot of that change, both due to COVID as one factor, and then, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which we're very quickly seeing is making quite clear that Russia is not a geoeconomic power on a global scale that can compete with the U.S. And even China isn't willing to upset the apple cart of the global international economic order to support Russia, which is nominally its closest ally, but in reality, I would say it probably isn't. There certainly are problems in that partnership. It's more of a partnership than a friendship.
But Mr. Hess, why is the world watching India so closely then? It is this deft management, yes, but what has changed so much that is making the world take a note of India, the manner in which just about every country is doing?
I mean, I don't mean to, downplay India's diplomacy. I certainly think Indian diplomacy is a part of it. But because we're at this turning point moment in global history where power relations and power blocks are being reshaped. I mean, we've seen even South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, countries that weren't previously aligned with the sanctions regime against Russia, join them. We're seeing a real potential change in the U.S.-China relationship, as well as concerns over how this interdependence, if there are more tensions in the future, will lead to a far worse geoeconomic conflict there. And India is, of course, the great prize if one side can pull it more to their alignment than the other. And I think that, Indian diplomacy is making the most of that sort of crisis, and there's opportunities that everybody wants something from India now. So India, as it rightfully should, and as one would expect, is going to see what it can get in exchange.
Okay. Professor Brahmachalani, you wanted to finish your point. Please go ahead. And would you say that time has come for India to get a permanent membership at the United Nations Security Council, UNSC?
The UN was established on the ruins of a world war.
Yes.
And major reform at the UN is not possible in peacetime. The reform process has stalled for decades. There is no progress on restructuring the UN, making it more meaningful, more effective. In fact, what's happening is that the UN increasingly is getting marginalized in international relations. Look at the UN Security Council. It's gridlocked. There's no way that gridlock can be broken, especially now because of this new Cold War between the US and Russia. So India getting a permanent seat at the UN Security Council is a goal that India will never realize, because the UN is a creature of a world war. And today, some powers might be saying rhetorically that they support India's membership of the UN Security Council. But the fact is that the Security Council can be restructured only by a consensus among all the member states of the UN. So that prospect is distant. What India should be worried about is the fact that the international scene today has become less favorable to India's economic and geostrategic interests. Look at the way India's foreign exchange reserves are getting drained because of the new energy crisis. The energy crisis has been triggered largely by Western sanctions on Russia.
Yes.
And also, India is a major arms importer, and defense imports are also becoming dearer. So India is facing a double whammy: dearer energy imports and dearer defense imports. And then to make things worse, India's neighborhood is becoming more troublesome. And then we have the U.S. under President Joe Biden resuming U.S. coddling of Pakistan. You mentioned the F-16 deal. The F-16 deal is a manifestation of the new U.S. coddling of Pakistan.
But Professor Brahmachalani, talking specifically about the energy crisis, hasn't India managed to communicate to the world? We saw what S Jaishankar said, and only recently we have heard what the Petroleum Affairs Minister has said in Washington, just 12 hours ago, where he said that India will purchase oil from wherever it wants. So it has nothing to do with the countries deciding whether India will be purchasing from Russia or any of the countries. India will decide depending on its requirement and what it thinks is best for it.
That is true. India has stepped up its purchases of Russian oil. But Russian oil, despite the stepped up imports, makes up only about 10 to 12% of India's total oil requirements. India is the world's third largest consumer of oil after the US and China.
Yes.
And gas imports have become dearer for India. Oil imports have become dearer for India. given the cost considerations that stare at India, and if this war in Ukraine prolongs, which is a real possibility, then India would be faced with hard choices next year. So the geoeconomic and the geostrategic environment are becoming less favorable for India's interests.
The point being made here, Ambassador Sajanhar, about challenges that India faces going forward. S Jaishankar, who is on his first visit to New Zealand as External Affairs Minister, has said, and I'm quoting him, that it was natural that different countries in the context of Ukraine will react differently, and different regions would react a little differently. The people would view it from their viewpoint, their immediate interest and historical experiences, their insecurities. This is the view that India has maintained vis-a-vis its stand, where it has condemned the war, but it has also said that it will not take a position in favor of Ukraine or in favor of Russia or against Russia particularly. When we look at the crisis which is there at hand, and the equation particularly in the context of rupee and dollar, but would you also not say that vis-a-vis dollar, there are other countries, other currencies have bigger challenges, and India is really holding on to its own? The rupee is holding well.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria. I think you have put it very clearly. This is the issue, not only with the rupee. It is not an issue only with the, economy of India. It is a problem that the whole world is confronting. As we were discussing earlier, even as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, it is not only India that is handling these challenges. But I think the point to be noted here is that India has managed to handle these challenges much better than most other countries. I will say, I think India has stood out as a beacon of hope for the world. While, there is so much of confusion, so much of volatility, so much of disorder around the world. And even in our northern neighbor, you look at the zero COVID policy, etc., what it is doing as far as the lockdowns are concerned, even as far as the economy is concerned. Even today, during the, whether it is the pandemic or it is the war, India has stood out. It has, that is why it is a partner of choice. That is why it has become an indispensable partner for all countries, on different sides of the divide, where, you want to deal with international challenges, global challenges, whether it's climate change, terrorism, healthcare, education, you name it. And I think India has to be on that high table, because I think India has acquitted itself most creditably. And particularly, you mentioned about the rupee dollar exchange rate. You look at the manner in which all the other currencies, they have slided as compared to India. And India has, said that we respect the UN Charter, the UN principle, territorial integrity, sovereignty, etc. So we have been fully in favor of that. And as
and Ambassador Sajanhar, increasingly India has challenged the grouping itself. I mean, the relevance of UN and its hypocrisy and diplomacy in these times as well. I have just enough time for Andrew K.P. Leong. Mr. Leong, India at multiple groupings, if you look at Quad or several others, why is it that these countries are looking at India as the destination to be as far as Asia is concerned?
Well, of course, the profile of India is rising. For example, India recently took part in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is, of course, is a different bloc, if you like, outside the United States-dominated West. And of course, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization encompasses a great deal of the more powerful countries in the developing world. Now, as I said, the whole world order has been changing quite significantly, in the sense that the developing world is going to account for more than 50% of the world economy by the year 2030, according to the latest study of the OECD. So I think India is trying to catch this kind of paradigm shift, as indeed China and other countries.
Okay. And Mr. Hess, the West, the way it looks at India, and even in the context of F-16, you heard what S Jaishankar said, and there has been also a message that has been communicated by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh to his US counterpart Lloyd Austin, that India's concerns over Washington's decision to provide a sustenance package for Pakistan's F-16 fleet. So India is saying that we know why you're making these deals.
Well, I think the reason why India is being so particularly vocal about this is it comes at where there's a particular change in the balance. As we were discussing earlier, India hasn't really sat in one block or the other, but for a lot of its military hardware, it has been very much dependent on Russia, whereas Pakistan has primarily been dependent on the United States for their military hardware. Because of the sanctions environment on Russian arms, that is, and the damage to Russia's own arms industry that we're seeing, evident as a result of this war and how it's not quite all that it is promised to be, that risks creating a potential imbalance in power then if the United States supplies newer and more advanced technology to Pakistan, whereas of course the United States wants to convince India to stay in line with these sanctions, to comply with them. But on that, I would just rebut one point that was made earlier. Russia has used its energy supplies as a weapon for decades before there were any sanctions on it. So, the primary cause of these issues is Russia's economic war alongside its war in Ukraine, not the sanctions in itself.
Yes, so the world is taking note of India First doctrine of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, its opportunities and ramifications we have just discussed on this show. Professor Brahmachalani, Ashok Sajanhar, Andrew Kyopiluang and Maximilian Hess, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And that's all from me. I'll be seeing you next week with another episode of A Billion Ideas. Thanks so much for watching. From the book Ramayana. The reason why I'm saying is क्योंकि अभी जो अरुण गोविल का एक वीडियो वायरल हुआ था, that is India's connect to Lord Ram. और यहाँ पर जो डिपिक्शन है उसके बारे में सवाल उठ रहा है और बोला जा रहा है ये कंप्लीट डिविएशन है और फेथ के साथ छेड़छाड़ किया गया है.
Okay, first of all, not even 1% of our film is deviation from the actual Ramayana. जब हम रामायण की बात करते हैं, what comes to our mind and what have you seen in the teaser? रामायण क्या है? रामायण एक कथा है जिसमें the devil king, the demon king, रावण वो हमारी माँ सीता का हरण कर लेते हैं. भगवान राम माँ सीता को बचाने जाते हैं, समुद्र पे पुल बांधते हैं, वो वानर सेना की, सुग्रीव की और बजरंगबली हनुमान की सहायता लेते हैं. This is like in a nutshell, this is Ramayana as told to a 5-year-old kid. He will understand this much of story. This is the story we have lived with. This is the story we are retelling. This is the story we are showing. So there is not even an iota of deviance from the actual storyline. Nothing of that sort. Am I right, Om?
Absolutely, absolutely. The idea is to recreate Ramayana onto celluloid. The idea is to and when I say recreate, I don't want anybody to misunderstand. Is to change it. Yeah. What I mean to say is translate from the books to celluloid. So this, as I've always said before, that this is not a film for us. This is a representation of our bhakti. This is the representation of our shraddha. This is the representation of everything that we stand for. We are and both of us and
yes,
most of us.
You have said that this is your passion project. I've read some interviews where you said that this is your passion project. I'm going to get into specifics now because yes. जो ये 90 सेकंड का टीजर है उस पे हर एक फ्रेम पर डिबेट चल रहा है. There is an image of Saif Ali Khan as Ravan who is sitting.
चल रहा है.
जी प्लीज आप बोलिए उसके बाद मैं सवाल पूछूंगी.
No, I just wanted to say that not every frame isn't debated because that's not the case. I mean, the dialogue that we had in the trailer, धस जाए धरती चटक जाए आकाश, न्याय के हाथों होकर रहेगा अन्याय का सर्वनाश. आ रहा हूँ मैं अधर्म का विध्वंस करने, आ रहा हूँ न्याय के 2 पैरों से अन्याय के 10 सर कुचलने. I think these are the lines which our Manoj ji have written, which are extremely, we are so proud of these lines. We are extremely proud of these lines. And when you see them in the film, it's a huge monologue that Prabhu Shri Ram's character played by Prabhas delivering. These are the things that we want to be proud of. These are the things that we would like to talk about. These are the things that we want to would like to have the conversation with, and not about some things which we don't agree with.
Okay, so then how are you looking at some criticism? Let me ask those criticisms and then we'll go ahead with the conversations that you want this trailer to generate. There is one image of Saif Ali Khan as Ravan who is sitting on a mystic bird. There are scholars, historians who are of the opinion that in Ramayana there is no description that of any kind of bird of this nature.
Sure. So he's demonic, right? He is Mayavi. He is a person who is the greatest villain of all time. He is a demon. He's a 10-headed demon, and you will have to see the film to actually understand that particular point. But he's riding a huge creature, right? And that's his right. And that is a very it's a very negative visual that I see personally as a filmmaker. And when I talk about when I talk about a really ruthless, a demon king called Ravan, I see him riding that obnoxious creature. एक दुराचारी, एक दुष्ट प्रवृत्ति का ऐसा ये किरदार है रावण हमारी इतिहास का, और ये दुष्ट प्रवृत्ति का किरदार जो है वो जिस पर सवार होके आ रहा है वो भी एक खौफनाक और नेगेटिविटी से भरा हुआ ऐसा ये क्रीचर है.
So from mustache to beard, इस पर जो जी go ahead, Manoj ji go ahead. हाँ.
जी because I was just trying to say that who doesn't know, I mean, how a Pushpak Viman would look like. I mean, you do not need Manoj Muntashir or Om Raut to really tell you how a Pushpak Viman.
Hello and welcome to Now Showing. I'm Atika Faruqi. How is this festive season going for you? I'm sure you've been watching good cinema and dancing to good songs, reading good books and meeting with interesting people. I went from pillar to post to get you some really nice people and conversations in this episode. So let's start with the highlights. Nazar Andaaz is a slice-of-life film with a few faults in writing. It boasts of Kumud Mishra's outstanding performance. Riding high on the success of their latest big-screen outing, Vikram Vedha, Hrithik Roshan and Saif Ali Khan are singing praises about the making of the film. Jackie Shroff, Pankaj Tripathi and actor Aditya Gupta talk all things legal on the show Criminal Justice. Tiska Chopra, Rajesh Telang and Mukesh Tiwari speak about telling stories from small-town India. And Shrivalli composer DSP talks about his new song and language war. Is there a war at all? So let's talk about this week's film, Nazar Andaaz. I watched this film and it's a slice-of-life film about a man who lives alone and has been visually impaired since birth. With two random people in his staff whom he has recently found, he travels to his birthplace to reconnect with his childhood. In the process, he gives a few lessons to these two unprivileged people, Divya Datta and Ali played by Abhishek Banerjee. He also reconnects with his childhood love played by Rajeshwari Sachdev, who is outstanding in this extended cameo.
एक दूसरे का साथ देना और एक दूसरे के साथ जिंदगी बिताना दोनों में फर्क होता है.
The very brilliant Kumud Mishra, who plays this man so authentically without letting the viewer think for a second that he is acting.
मैं फ्लाइट और ट्रेन में बंद होके नहीं जा सकता.
It's a class in performance where an actor lets go of the insecurities of how he is looking on screen to perform a role that becomes so heartwarming that you see no shortcoming in that person because the zest for life, pride in oneself and independence of daily living is endearing. The star of the film is certainly Kumud Mishra.
हाथ पकड़ो. मदद के इंतजार की आदत नहीं डालनी चाहिए, वरना सड़क के उस तरफ ही खड़े रह जाओगे.
Story by director Vikrant Deshmukh and the producer Lakshman Utekar, who by the way has also produced Mimi and has been an avid cinematographer, is a beautiful thought. Screenplay and dialogues by Rishi Virmani can be credited with some of the best punch lines that I have heard in the recent past, and one-liners and humorous bits of words that really make you laugh.
कभी खाया है?
नहीं.
The team has made an earnest, honest film that can be enjoyed with the whole family, and also while celebrating life, tugs at your attention towards the people who cannot see. What's their fault? How do they manage without eyes? The tiny problem though is with the writing of the film.
नमस्ते वकील साहब, मेरी वसीयत के कागजात प्लीज जल्दी से बनवा दीजिए.
The story on paper had a lot of potential to be a truly deep and a very meaningful and a moving film. Also, the story shifts track between who is it about, the blind old man alone or the three men on the journey.
माँ कैसे दिखती है?
The lack of a backstory, particularly of Kumud Mishra, hampers the connect between the character and the viewer. And the journey from Mumbai to Mandvi could have been cinematically been captured with a lot of variety. But there is that one scene where Kumud is taken to a place with white sand and shining stars in the sky in the background where he can run. It's beautiful. This scene with Rajeshwari was so romantic and so deep and so meaningful that I was just glaring at that scene. It's worth a watch if you like a hopeful film that can be watched by the entire family.
घनी किस्मत से हमारी इस दुनिया को देख सकूं अच्छे से.
मैं तो जब भी कुछ देखा गंदी नजर से देखा, पर वो तो आगे मिलनी नहीं चाहिए.
Now moving on, Hrithik Roshan hired an acting coach lately to make sure that he does not do anything the same way as he did before. And Saif is certainly in the best form and the best phase of his acting career. A Hindi remake of the hit film Vikram Vedha, and again called as Vikram Vedha, has been liked for its drama, action and dialogues. Here are the two seasoned actors, actually legit superstars, on how this film enhanced their skills.
अरे कहाँ कर रहा है यार, एक्शन के लिए आए, हमको भी पता है, हाथ में चक्कू है साला, रेडियो पे गाना आ रहा है, निकल जाएगा. पहले सुन लेते ना, 2 मिनट, क्या फर्क पड़ता है?
मैंने ये फिल्म देखी थी in 2017 when it came out, and the original, and I had loved it, and I had actually expressed my desire that if this is ever going to be remade in Hindi, I would love to do this film.
I saw it. And then I thought, oh, this is really good. Like I loved Madhavan, you know. I thought it was great, and I don't know what I could do differently, whatever. But then when I would come to do my part, you'd forget all that, and you just got a different approach somehow. It's interesting to watch now and compare them.
I had to find the composure in me because I'm not a very composed person. I'm a very restless person. So to find the composure in me was very difficult. The reason why the composure was even more important is because I was going to face an actor, a co-actor who is one of the most real actors that I have seen. And I have been a fan since decades now. And I knew that this is the first time that I could feel a sense of displacement when I'm on set, because even one single fake note by me would expose me like this.
I was extremely excited to work with Hrithik and also very nervous, and I thought that because I've seen his films and sometimes very difficult to look at anything. It could be the most beautiful girl in the world or the most beautiful sunset, but you can't stop looking at this guy.
एक अपराध एक दंड, अगर अपराध करने वाले को सजा देते हैं तो करवाने वाला बच निकलता है.
When you approach a character, if you are getting mathematics into it and you're planning, okay, he did that, so I'll do this. If you're doing that, it's actually a very not a very intelligent way to go about it. The most simplest and the most intelligent way is to know that every individual is different. It's got to be the interrogation scene, the first scene. That's got to be my favorite.
अच्छे और बुरे में चुनना तो बड़ा आसान होता है सर, लेकिन ई कहानी में तो दोनों बुरे हैं.
You know, I watch a film with very few people, and she is someone whose opinion I do value. She's obviously a great actor. And honest to me. She was really happy. She thought Hrithik was great. She thought I was very good. She thought the film was really good. She said at interval, she said, "My God, this is a blockbuster." And then at the end of the film, she said,
what a movie. She said,